Isn't the easiest way to prevent mass shootings banning guns? Let's discuss. Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Now, my work schedule is still a bit crazy for the next couple of weeks, but I am going to do my best to get 2 full episodes out this week. I appreciate you sticking with me. And thank you for all the feedback I've received about the show. It's very encouraging, and I hope it's been a good thing for you and your family. If you ever want to send an email in, sharpeningarrowspodcast@gmail.com, please feel free to do so. We are also on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpeningarrows. I can promise no technical wizardry, but if you prefer to watch instead of listen, we're there. Look for us, Sharpening Arrows on YouTube. All right, we are just under a couple of weeks removed from that horrible mass shooting in Minnesota. It left 2 school children dead after they were attending a mass in a church. Around 20 were wounded. Our last episode, we talked about why do we pray after tragedy? And I'm not going to rehash that, but I really would encourage you to go back if you haven't and listen to that episode because that's a real question. And teens, if you have questions about things like how could a good God allow something horrible like this to happen, I would encourage you not to bury that question. You're not the first person to think that, to ask that. That's been something that people have talked about for thousands of years in Christendom, and there are good answers. Some of them are in that podcast. I'm certainly not going to say I am the be all end all with the answers, but don't stop looking and don't stop praying. Don't stop talking to people about this. And that's kind of the point of this podcast. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to have doubts, but it's not okay to stuff them or to just act like they don't exist or you're doing something wrong. God's big enough. He's not worried about it. He can handle your questions. And hopefully, podcasts like this, and I encourage you, your parents, your pastors, talk to other people. There are other people who've thought about these issues. Look at the great books throughout history. Other people have thought and talked about these things before. All right. So we talked about that, but there's always kind of another issue lurking under the surface whenever a mass shooting happens, and that is the issue of gun control. And I mentioned this in the last episode, but those attacks on prayer were really kind of a way to say, well, stop praying and pass this gun control law that I want or I think is important. I don't want mass shootings anymore, so let's get rid of the guns, because if there are no guns, there would be no mass shootings. So let's start with a pause point right there. Do you think new restrictions on firearms would stop mass shootings? I think that's a question worth discussing. I think sometimes as a teenager, when you're first thinking about this, you either think, I like firearms, I enjoy shooting, I would never hurt anyone, and that's the end of the discussion. Or maybe you're on the other side and you think, why in the world would anyone have a firearm if they weren't a police officer or in the military? Don't you know what people do with those things? They're scary. And the discussion kind of ends right there. So today I want us to really think through this topic and this issue, whichever side that you're on. But I would encourage you to stop and to answer that question. All right. As always on this podcast, we are going to start with arguments for the side that I personally disagree with. Remember, if you disagree with me, that is okay. I'm going to do my best to tell you what I think is correct, but I have been wrong before. Just ask my wife. And if you really don't like me, ask my kids. But let's dive in here. All right. So let's talk about arguments for gun control. Number one. Well, let's look at question 1 of the Great 8. What happens next? Well, we know what's going to happen next. There's going to be another shooter at another school. That person will obtain a gun, and there will be another tragedy. Now, it's true we don't know the details. We don't know where the shooting will be. We don't know how many people will die, how many people will be injured, how many families will be devastated by a mass shooting. But we do know there will be another tragedy. We need to do something. If you ban guns, there won't be any more mass shootings. Look, these things are weapons of war. They don't belong in our schools. They don't belong in our streets. There's no reason for individuals to own something that only should belong in the army. Let's look at England. In 1996, they had a school shooting in Dunblane, Scotland. Terrible tragedy. It killed 16 5- and 6-year-olds and their teacher. Within a year, a widely supported ban was passed on all privately owned handguns. This is from oureconomy.org, which gave Britain some of the world's toughest gun laws. You see that? Britain had one major mass shooting and they took action. They banned handguns. Now let's look at the homicide rate in Britain. In the UK, the homicide rate is 9.5 per million as of March 2024. In the US, it's 68 per million. I want you to understand those numbers. In the UK, which has extremely restrictive gun laws, basically a ban on handguns, the homicide rate is under 10 per million. In the United States, it's almost 70 per million. It's 7 times higher in the United States. Look, that's it. That's the answer. The UK banned guns, their murder rate is way lower. If we ban guns, our murder rate would be way lower. We wouldn't have more of these horrible school shootings. Argument number 2. Let's look at question 8 of the grade 8. What does the Bible say? Well, I'm going to quote some Bible verses here. Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Matthew 19:19 talks about you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus was asked the greatest commandment, Matthew 22. He says, you shall love the Lord your God, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. We see that repeated in Mark 12. Jesus affirms, the first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Paul talks about this, Romans 13:9. For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is a clear biblical imperative to love your neighbor. Well, if you love your neighbor, you don't want them to die at the hands of a gun. People in America are simply being selfish by refusing to hand over their firearms. They're thinking of their own desires, their own wants. They're not thinking about what happens to their neighbor. And they should be. That's what the Lord has commanded. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You don't want someone to come and shoot up the children at your school or your children, wherever they're at school or a homeschool group or church. So be willing to give up your firearm to protect others. Love your neighbor as yourself. All right, let's have a pause point. Do you think that is an accurate application of the biblical principle to love your neighbor? Why or why not? As you do that, let me tell you about Mama Bear Prayers, a podcast for moms who are knee-deep in dishes and training their teens. Whether you are in the carpool lane or the coffee line, host Charity Rios wants to come alongside you and help you grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. Now, as every parent knows, raising kids can feel a bit like a ping pong game. You bounce from moments of joy to moments of deepest concern. Combine that with the busyness of life, the sports, the events, the school or the co-op, the church. All this back and forth can leave you feeling overwhelmed and even isolated. And Charity knows this firsthand because she is the mom of 4 very busy boys. And it's why she created Mama Bear Prayers. to support moms who are on the journey of raising children. Now, I am not the target audience for Mama Bear Prayers podcast, but even I have been encouraged as Charity dives into scripture, shares her insights, and most importantly, prays. God works through prayer. So check out Mama Bear Prayers today. All right, so now we're going to refute those arguments, the pro-gun control arguments, and then we'll talk about the arguments against gun control. All right, so this first argument is what happens next? We know another shooter will obtain a firearm, and then we look at the UK. UK banned firearms, and therefore it has a much lower homicide rate. All right, let's have a pause point right there. That fact is true. What other fact being true would negate this point? Okay, we know that England banned handguns, in 1996, and their murder rate is much lower than the US. This happens a lot of times in statistics. I just want to mention is that sometimes someone will say a statistic that's true but incomplete, and that incompleteness leaves the wrong impression, and that's certainly what we have here. Because what we would want to see is does England banning firearms, did that lead to a significant decrease in homicides? Well, we can go look at the historical data from a site called murdermap.co.uk. The homicide rate in 1996, the year of the tragedy, was 11.4 per million. After that, in 2001, it went up to 14.6 per million, peaked in 2003 at 17.9 per million, and then in 2022 it was 11.3 per million, and now it's dropped off a little bit since. And so there's been some ups and downs in the murder rate, but essentially it's been around the same level that it was after England banned handguns. And in fact, it actually peaked in 2003, which was 7 years after 1996. So we do not see evidence that banning handguns led to a dramatic drop off in homicide. What we see is that the UK had a lower homicide rate than the United States, banned handguns, and continued to have a lower homicide rate than the United States. And there's another bit of information here that I think is interesting. This is from express.co.uk. Britain still has around 2 million firearms, and that's a 20% increase in 20 years. Most are shotguns, 1.3 million, and it has around 600,000 firearms, which are mostly rifles used for target shooting. The number of those firearms, again, mostly rifles, has doubled since 2003. Now, you'll remember that 2003 number because that's when murder rates or homicide rates in the UK peaked, and they've been declining ever since. So we see that an increase in firearms in the UK didn't actually lead to an increase in homicide. All right, let's go to this argument number 2. This argument that it's not loving to own a weapon, to oppose gun control, because you are prioritizing your own wants over protecting your neighbor. You're not loving your neighbor. All right. So again, this is why you have to think, because these questions, these grade 8 questions are tools in your tool belt, but tools can be misapplied, used poorly, and so we have to continue to think. Let's go to question 3. Is there a principle involved? Well, if your neighbor gossips, should you lose your right to speak? If your neighbor drives drunk and kills a family, should you not be able to drive? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Because just because someone else does something doesn't mean you lose your right to do it or your ability to do it. See, there's no issue with a law-abiding citizen owning a firearm because a firearm isn't inherently evil. It's a tool just like fire. Imagine if after a forest fire, the government came out and said, all right, that's it. We are confiscating all matches from everyone because we don't want any more forest fires. They can be deadly. They can burn down hundreds of thousands of acres from a single match. So we're just going to have match control. We're going to get rid of the matches and we'll get rid of the forest fires. Well, that would be ridiculous because you and I use matches responsibly. We aren't the ones responsible for the forest fire. So there's no need to take away that from us. Someone else's sin doesn't mean that a thing, unless it is inherently destructive or evil, should be taken away from others. Okay, so if you want to extend the analogy in firearms, you could say, well, there's a reason that we ban atomic bombs from private ownership because it is so destructive. Well, first of all, there's no practical use for it aside from complete destruction, but it's so destructive that even one wrong use would be such a disaster. We can't allow private people to own it. All right, so let's have a pause point here. Which of the grade 8 questions would you ask to make the case against gun control? Again, grade 8 questions are question 1, what happens next? Question 2, has this been tried before? Question 3, is there a principle involved? Question 4, what are the trade-offs? Question 5, what do you mean by that? Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And question 8, what does the Bible say? Take a moment and think. Think, how would you refute these arguments? And again, just because I don't pick your question doesn't mean your question was wrong. There's lots of ways to approach this subject. And I'm actually going to start with a bit of an unusual one. I'm going to start with question 6. Is this an appeal to emotion or logic? And I think this is really important, and it kind of hits back on the attack on prayer that we talked about last time, is that after a mass shooting, it is obviously a deeply emotional, tragic time. Every parent has this moment of, how would I feel if that was my child? And I will do anything to stop that from happening. And the gun control advocates know this. They know it's a high emotion time. And so they want to capitalize on that emotion. And I would suggest they want to do that because they can't appeal to logic because the facts don't support gun control. And so they want to ride the emotion into their policy. I'm going to share an example that I was sort of connected to. In 2017, on October 1st, there was a horrible, horrible mass shooting in Las Vegas. Killed over 50 people. A man punched out a window in one of the hotels here and shot at people in a concert. Just a horrible, horrible event. And after that, there was a gun control group, I don't remember which one, that had a conference call with media members. And of course, they were calling for more gun control. And I remember on that call, one of the people basically spitballing ideas of, well, what restrictions can we pass after this shooting? Well, we think the gunman used a tripod, so maybe we can ban tripods. And I'm just sitting there going, wait, what? You're just going to be reactionary to what happened, whatever happened, and just kind of use that as a lever to, well, maybe we can ban that because it got used in this shooting. And that was a real turnoff to me, and kind of just showed the mindset of what is happening. It's not being logical and thinking. It's, oh, there's this horrible tragedy, and we're going to capitalize on the emotion to get any sort of restriction we can on firearms. All right, so let's go to argument number 2. Question 2 in the grade 8 is, has this been tried before? If gun control had never been tried, it would make a lot more sense to try it after a mass shooting. But what we've seen, both in Minnesota and around the country, is that gun control has been tried continuously. In fact, The governor of Minnesota is Tim Walz. You may remember him as the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris. And in 2023, he signed a massive gun control bill. This is what he said at the time. There's no place for weapons of war in our schools, churches, banks, or anywhere else people are just trying to live their lives. Today is about taking meaningful action to create a safer future for our kids, and I'm proud to sign this common sense, life saving legislation into law. Okay, well, why didn't it work? 2 years ago, you said you were signing a bill that would keep weapons of war out of schools and churches. And now, 2 weeks ago, someone shot up a church with school kids in it. Why didn't your plan work? It is really frustrating, and I'm sorry for letting my frustration shine through there. But it's really frustrating to watch people whose policies failed insist that we have to go back and try those policies again, except more. Gun control advocates should explain their past failures and why the policies they promised would prevent this didn't work before urging more gun control. And of course, it's not just Minnesota. Let's look at Chicago. Over Labor Day weekend, 58 people were shot in Chicago, 8 people died. Now, if you know anything about Chicago crime, you know that's not unusual, unfortunately. In 2024, over Labor Day, there were 26 wounded in shootings and 5 dead. In 2023, the totals were 8 dead and 41 injured. And in 2022, there were 55 shot, including 11 fatalities. That is just a horrible, horrible amount of death and destruction every weekend in Chicago from shootings, from guns. So let's have a pause point. Do you think Chicago has strict or lax gun control laws? We know there's a lot of shootings in Chicago. Have they ever tried gun control? This is from Fox News in 2022. Chicago has long been known as a city with some of the strictest gun laws, which stretches back to its ban on handguns in 1982. Now, the Supreme Court did strike that ban down in 2010, but the city has continued with other strict laws. The city has a ban on assault weapons, defined as any weapon that shoots automatically more than one shot without manual reloading by a single function of the trigger, which includes automatic rifles and ghost guns. Large capacity magazines are also banned in Cook County, which includes Chicago. Those policies haven't worked. So even if you think gun control is the logical answer, you've got to have the humility to look around and say, yeah, but it's not working. And so I need to go figure out what's wrong with my theory before I just pretend that all of this empirical evidence doesn't exist. And that's what we're going to talk about in argument number 3 here, why gun control doesn't work. And we're going to look at the question number 1, maybe my favorite question of the grade 8, what happens next? Okay, let's go to Minnesota. Governor Walz signs this gun control bill. It's now illegal. There are certain new restrictions on guns. Okay, well, if you are willing and depraved enough to shoot school children, you know what's not going to stop you? A law saying you can't get a certain type of gun. Because, and this is important, laws don't stop criminals from breaking the law. It's already illegal to murder. It's already illegal to carry a weapon on school property. So if you have a person who is willing to break the law, passing another law seems like a very inefficient way to stop them from breaking the law. The reason that you are saying we need more gun control, we need more laws, is because this person broke the law. Well, passing another law is not going to cut it. But now, say you have a law-abiding citizen someone who uses their weapon responsibly, maybe carries concealed to protect themselves and others. Well, if you make it harder for them to obtain a gun or to carry a gun, well, they're going to follow the law, and then they won't have their weapon when the criminal comes and starts shooting. And this is a real problem because good guys with guns are generally what stop mass shootings. This is something I wrote a couple of years ago. A good guy with a gun just did something gun control laws couldn't do: stop a would-be mass shooter. Again, this is from June 2023. That's when a man walked into the Turnberry Towers lobby in Las Vegas carrying a rifle, and he began shooting. Fortunately, he didn't injure anyone before an armed security guard returned fire. He hit the shooter several times. Police also reported the shooter's rifle appears to have malfunctioned after his first shot. And that doesn't take away from the security guard's heroism or the importance of what he did. Shooters can clear malfunctioning weapons. But this shooter never got a chance to fix and fire his rifle because of the security guard's bravery, skill, and firearm. That gun most likely allowed the security guard to save lives. And this isn't the only example of the life-saving benefits of a gun in the right hands. In June 2023, police in Allen, Texas released body camera footage of an officer responding to a deadly mass shooting. The officer didn't wait for backup. He ran toward the gunfire and engaged and killed the murderer. In July 2022, Elisha Dicken was at a mall in Greenwood, Indiana. A man opened fire with a rifle, killing 3 and wounding 2 others. It could have been much worse, but Dicken was legally carrying a handgun. He used his weapon to kill the murderer. And this is the problem with gun control laws, is they make it harder for the people who stop the criminals to carry weapons, while not doing anything to stop the criminal from committing the crimes. All right, let's have our final pause point here. Do you think a sign proclaiming that somewhere is a gun-free zone would stop a criminal from carrying a gun there? We're thinking about. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review right there at the bottom of the podcast. Click 5 stars and share it with your friends and Christian community. Stay sharp and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.